The night sky was broken by fire falling from above. The ground shook as alien ships cut through the clouds, their weapons burning cities to ash. Across the battlefield stood a young human woman, her armor blackened, her shield cracked, and her sword glowing faintly with heat. She was tired, but her eyes burned with the same fire that swallowed the world around her. Her name was Elira. For years she had carried the weight of humanity's survival on her shoulders. She had fought wars, led armies, and buried too many friends to count. Now she stood alone at the mouth of the last ruined valley, the enemy pressing in like waves of fire. Her people had already been scattered, their leaders gone, their hope fading like smoke into the air. The aliens came in endless numbers, their forms twisted and strange, with armor that reflected fire and blades that dripped with black energy. Every step they took shook the earth as if the ground itself rejected them. Yet Elira did not step back. She raised her sword, though her arms trembled from endless battles. She knew this would be her last stand, and she was ready to meet it. The valley roared with war cries, the sound echoing across the burning trees. Elira gripped her shield tighter, pressing her lips together. She was not afraid of dying. What she feared most was being forgotten, her people erased from the story of the stars. She would not let that happen. If this was her final battle, it would be written in fire across the galaxy. As the enemy drew closer, her vision blurred. She remembered the faces of those she had lost, friends who had stood beside her in the first invasions, brothers and sisters who had fallen under alien blades. One face in particular burned in her mind, a soldier she had once trusted above all others. His name had long been carried by the wind of the dead, and she had buried him herself in the ashes of the First War. The flames around her swirled higher, and for a moment the battlefield seemed to fall silent. Elira took a deep breath, her sword steady again in her hand. She whispered to herself, a promise that even if she was the last human standing, she would not bow. Her heart thundered in her chest like a drum of war, and she raised her blade to meet the shadows that charged, and then, through the roar of fire and steel, she heard it, a voice that should have been lost long ago. A voice that came not from memory but from the very air around her. It was deep, calm, and steady, carrying the weight of unbroken loyalty. It said only one thing, and it froze her where she stood. You forgot one more soldier. Elira froze at the sound. The battlefield was still roaring with alien cries, but that voice cut through the noise like a blade. She turned her head, expecting only shadows and fire, but her heart pounded harder when she saw a figure rising from the smoke. It was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the familiar stance of a warrior she had thought gone forever. Her eyes widened. For a moment she believed it was her mind playing tricks. She had seen too much death, carried too much grief. Maybe exhaustion had finally broken her. But when the flames parted, she saw the shape more clearly. A man with armor scarred from battles past. His face burned into her memory. It was Kalen, the comrade she had buried with her own hands long ago. Kalen's form glowed faintly as though caught between life and death. His eyes burned with silver fire, and his movements carried the same weight as when he had lived. He lifted his blade slowly, the edge reflecting the chaos around them. Elira's lips trembled as she whispered his name, and for the first time in years she felt something other than despair. She felt strength returning to her. The aliens seemed to sense the change. They slowed, their war cries faltering, their ranks shifted uneasily, as if the sight of Kalen's return unsettled even their cruel hearts. The ground shook again as they prepared to strike, but Elira no longer stood alone. Her grip tightened on her shield and her body steadied. She had thought her story was ending, but now it had been rewritten. Kalen's voice carried across the flames. You should have known, Elira. Death cannot silence loyalty. Not for me. Not for us. His tone was calm, yet filled with the fury of all battles lost. Elira's throat tightened, tears burning her eyes, but she could not look away. He was here, standing once more at her side. She raised her sword high, matching his stance, ready to fight again. The enemy charged, screaming with fury, their weapons glowing black against the firelight. But this time Elira felt no fear. Kalen's presence was like a shield around her, his spirit unbroken even by the grave. The first wave of alien warriors rushed forward, their claws tearing at the ground, their blades raised to strike. Elira stepped forward and met them head-on, her shield clashing with the force of thunder. Her sword cut through the air with renewed strength, slicing into alien armor that had once seemed unbreakable. Kalen moved beside her, his ghostly blade, striking with perfect precision, cutting down those who dared to come close. The two of them moved as one, just as they had in the wars long past. Fire blazed around them, but their courage burned brighter still. Elira shouted with every strike, her voice echoing across the valley. For humanity, for every name they tried to erase. Her words struck like weapons themselves, and the enemy faltered beneath the fury of her will. With Kalen at her side, she was no longer a lone soldier making her final stand. She was the embodiment of all who had fallen, and together they rose again. For the first time, the endless tide of alien warriors began to break. Fear spread through their ranks, confusion shaking their once unshakable march. The ground was littered with their fallen, their black armor scattered like ashes in the wind. Elira stood in the center of it all, her chest rising and falling, her blade dripping with victory. And beside her, Kalen's glowing figure stood unshaken. The war was not over, but the tide had turned. Humanity had not been silenced. Not yet. Not while the dead themselves could rise to fight again. Elira looked at Kalen, her heart steady with new purpose. Together, they stepped forward into the storm, ready to face what came next. The battlefield shook as alien warriors pressed harder against Elira and Kalen. Their black armor gleamed in the firelight, their weapons striking with brutal force. Yet each blow was met with steel and spirit. Elira's shield clashed again and again, sparks flying into the air as she pushed forward. Beside her, Kalen's glowing blade cut through enemies as if the darkness itself feared him. The ground was littered with broken weapons and the bodies of fallen aliens. Still, more came. They poured from the shadows like an endless tide. There, screams filling the valley. Elira's arm ached with every strike, her breath coming heavy and sharp. But she did not falter. With Kalen beside her, she carried the strength of two souls bound together in a single purpose. Kalen moved like a storm, his figure blurred between fire and smoke, his strikes too fast for the eye to follow. Each time an alien raised a blade against Elira, Kalen's sword was there to meet it. His presence was not of flesh, but of will, a soldier carved from memory and defiance. The enemy's fear deepened as they realized death had not claimed him fully. Elira fought with renewed fury. Every swing of her sword was driven by years of loss, every strike fueled by the memory of the countless dead. Her voice rose above the chaos, a war cry that carried the weight of humanity's suffering. We will not vanish. We will not bow. Her words rang out like thunder, shaking even the strongest of alien hearts. The valley glowed brighter as fire spread across the ground, burning trees into twisted shadows. The heat pressed against Elira's face, sweat dripping from her brow. Yet she did not slow. She remembered the first war when the aliens had struck suddenly, tearing cities apart. She remembered Kalen's sacrifice, how he had held the line until his last breath. Now he stood again, proving that sacrifice had not been in vain. Together they carved a path through the enemy. Every movement was a memory reborn. Elira struck low while Kalen struck high. She raised her shield as he cut down attackers from the flank. They fought like one being, a rhythm forged in blood and trust. The aliens stumbled, their lines breaking under the weight of human resilience made flesh and spirit. Still, the enemy's numbers seemed endless. For every alien that fell, 2 more rose from the flames. Elira felt her arms grow heavier, her body begging her to fall. But Kalen's voice steadied her. Stand, Elira. You are not fighting for yourself. You are fighting for every voice they tried to silence. His words cut deeper than any blade, and she lifted her sword again with unshakable resolve. The battle raged on. Smoke choked the air, flames roared, and the clash of steel echoed like the heartbeat of the dying world. Yet in that storm of destruction, Hope was reborn. Elira could see it in the hesitation of the aliens, in the fear that spread when Kalen's glowing figure struck them down. The invincible army of shadows was breaking, and humanity was rising through her blade. When the last of the wave fell, Elira stood panting, her armor scorched and dented. Kalen lowered his sword, his silver eyes fixed on her with calm strength. Around them lay silence, broken only by the crackle of fire. But Elira knew this was not the end. The enemy was gathering beyond the valley, preparing for something greater. She tightened her grip on her weapon, ready for what came next. For the dead had risen, and the living refused to fall. The war was far from over, but Elira and Kalen would face it together. And in that moment, under the fire-lit sky, humanity's final hope burned brighter than ever before. The valley lay in ruins. Smoke curled into the night sky, carrying the bitter scent of ash and death. Elira's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breath, her sword heavy in her hand. She had survived the first wave, but she knew this was only the beginning. Across the horizon, alien war horns sounded again, and their echoes promised endless. Blood Kalen's figure flickered faintly in the firelight. Though his form was not bound by flesh, he carried himself with the same command he once had in life. He looked to Elira, his silver eyes sharp with determination. "They will not stop," he said, "but neither will we." His voice carried a strength that settled her heart, even as fear clawed at the edges of her mind. Elira's thoughts drifted to the cities behind her, families hidden in underground shelters, children who had never seen the stars because the skies had been filled with war. She clenched her fist tighter around her shield. If she fell here, those lives would vanish under alien fire. She could not allow that, not after all they had already endured. The ground trembled as the next wave approached. This time it was not foot soldiers alone. Towering machines marched with them, their legs like pillars of iron, their weapons glowing with black energy. The sight struck fear into her heart, but Kalen stepped forward. His glowing figure seemed brighter in the face of such terror. "We break their giants," he said. "Then their armies will crumble." His words gave her no choice but to believe. The machines fired beams of energy that scorched the earth, carving deep scars into the ground. Elira raised her shield, the impact slamming her back several steps. Sparks flew, and pain tore through her arm. Still, she did not fall. She steadied herself and charged forward, her blade raised high. Kalen matched her step, their spirits moving as one. Together they struck the legs of the towering machines. Elira's blade cut through metal that should have been unbreakable, fueled by a strength she did not know she still carried. Kalen's ghostly sword passed through armor like it was nothing but mist, and the machines staggered under their combined assault. The battlefield roared as one of the great beasts fell with a thunderous crash. The alien soldiers screamed in rage and surged forward to protect their machines. Elira spun with her shield, knocking several to the ground, her sword finding their hearts with merciless precision. Kalen moved faster, a blur of silver light cutting through enemy ranks. Their advance slowed as panic spread through their lines. The humans they thought broken were rising stronger than ever. Elira shouted as she fought, her voice filled with defiance. "Every stone you burned, every life you took, every name you tried to erase, we carry them all. And we will not stop." Her cry echoed louder than the alien horns, and Kalen's blade answered her words with steel. Their will was unshakable, and the aliens began to retreat under the storm of their fury. The ground was littered with broken machines and alien corpses. Flames danced across twisted metal, painting the battlefield in shades of red and orange. Elira stood tall, her armor cracked, her body aching, but her spirit unbroken. Kalen turned his eyes toward the dark horizon, where more shadows gathered. He nodded once, a silent promise that they would not face the coming storm unprepared. Elira lifted her sword again, her breath steadying. The night was far from over. The war was far from won. But as long as she stood, and as long as Kalen's spirit remained beside her, humanity's story would not end in silence. It would be written in fire, blood, and the courage of those who refused to fall. The battlefield was silent for only a short while. The smoke curled over the broken machines and the bodies of fallen enemies. Elira's chest burned as she forced herself to stand straighter, her grip tight on her weapon. The air felt heavy, filled with the weight of a war that refused to end. Every breath tasted of ash and blood. Kalen's silver form flickered but did not fade. His eyes locked on hers, steady and calm as though reminding her that strength was not measured by flesh alone. He lifted his blade again, pointing it toward the horizon. More shadows moved there, gathering in numbers that seemed impossible to face. Yet his voice was calm when he spoke. "They will come again, and we will meet them." His words carried. Like iron across the firelit ground, Elira's thoughts turned to the faces of those hidden deep in the earth. The last human survivors waited in silence, hoping she would hold the line. She could feel their hopes pressing on her shoulders like stone, but she refused to bend. Her people had endured too much to fall now. Every scar on her body was proof that humanity was still alive, still fighting. The enemy began to advance once more. Their horns split the night, and the sound carried dread into the bones of the earth. This time the army was larger, their machines marching in tighter ranks, their soldiers moving as one. The ground shook beneath the weight of their advance, and the flames bent away from their terrible power. Yet Elira's eyes narrowed with defiance, her shield lifting high. Kalen raised his sword, his ghostly figure glowing brighter as the enemy approached. His voice rang out over the roar of the coming storm. "They believe fear is stronger than hope. Show them they are wrong." Elira's heart pounded harder, her spirit ignited by his words. Together they braced themselves for the crash of the enemy's fury. The clash came with the force of thunder. Alien blades struck against Elira's shield, each impact sending pain through her arm, yet she stood firm. Her sword carved through armor and bone, her movements sharp with the precision of years of battle. Kalen moved beside her like a shadow, of vengeance, his glowing blade cutting down those who dared to strike at her. The valley burned brighter with every strike. The aliens fought with ruthless strength, their machines stomping forward, firing bursts of black energy that tore through stone. Elira dodged one blast, rolling across scorched earth, and rose again with her shield up. She charged forward, striking at the leg of another machine. Sparks exploded as her sword bit deep, and the towering structure collapsed, crushing soldiers beneath its weight. Kalen's voice rose above the chaos, calling her name. She turned in time to see him cut through a cluster of enemies, his form blazing with silver fire. For a moment, he seemed more alive than dead, more real than the world around them. She felt her strength double at the sight, her heart steady once more. They were not two fighters. They were one force bound by loyalty and defiance. The battle raged on until the ground itself seemed ready to shatter. Still, Elira pressed forward, her voice breaking through the screams of war. For humanity, for every soul you tried to erase. Her cry spread like lightning, striking deep into the enemy ranks. The aliens faltered, their unity breaking under the storm of human will. Their numbers were vast, but their hearts wavered against a soldier who refused to die. At last, the wave began to slow. The surviving aliens pulled back, their horns sounding retreat for the first time. The field was theirs, but victory felt like smoke in the air, fragile and fleeting. Elira leaned on her sword, her breath heavy, her armor scorched. Kalen stood beside her, his eyes steady on the darkness that still gathered beyond the fire. The war was not over, but the night had been theirs. The battlefield was quiet for only a moment. The smoke from the retreating enemy curled upward, and the flames painted the sky in red and orange. Elira stood with her sword buried in the scorched earth, her chest heaving as she tried to regain her breath. Every bone in her body ached, yet her spirit refused to bend. She looked at Kalen, who stood beside her as if death itself had no hold over him. Kalen's figure flickered in the firelight. His silver eyes shone brighter now, carrying a strange weight Elira could not ignore. She wanted to ask how he had returned, how he still fought when his body had been lost years ago. But before she could speak, his voice came first. "You are not meant to carry this war alone. I returned because your burden is mine as well." His words settled over her like a shield, stronger than steel. The sound of alien horns rose again, carried by the wind. Elira's grip tightened on her sword, her heart sinking at the thought of facing another endless wave. Yet this time she felt no despair. Kalen's presence gave her strength, and she knew that his return was more than a chance. It was a sign that humanity's fight had not ended with the graves they dug. Their dead stood with them, bound by loyalty that could not be broken. The ground trembled as the enemy reformed beyond the smoke. This time their banners carried strange markings, symbols Elira had not seen before. The air grew colder, and the fire bent away from the approaching army. A shadow taller than the machines began to move among their ranks. Elira narrowed her eyes, knowing that the true leaders of the enemy were finally stepping forward. The next clash would decide more than survival. It would decide the future itself. Kalen's voice was steady as the shadow approached. This is what they have hidden until now. The true commanders, the ones who brought the first fire to your world. Elira's chest tightened as she watched the towering figure rise above the enemy army. Its form was wrapped in black armor that seemed alive, shifting and twisting like liquid. She knew at once that this was no ordinary foe. It was the will of the invasion given flesh. The alien commander raised its weapon, a spear of obsidian that pulsed with dark light. The air cracked with its power, and even the soldiers behind it seemed to draw back in fear. Elira's shield shook in her grip, but Kalen stepped forward, his blade lifted. His voice was like iron against thunder. We face not just an army, but their master. Together, we break it here. His words struck her like fire in the cold. The alien commander advanced with a roar that split the night. The ground quaked beneath its steps, stones breaking under its weight. Elira raised her shield and braced herself. The clash came with a force that tore the earth apart. Her shield rang with the strike of the obsidian spear, and her knees bent under the pressure. Kalen's glowing blade struck at the same moment, sparks flying as it met the dark weapon. The shock wave rolled through the valley like a storm. Elira shouted, pushing back with all her strength. Her sword cut across the commander's armor, sparks bursting where steel met shadow. The enemy staggered, but did not fall. Its voice bellowed. Across the valley, a sound that was neither human nor beast. Kalen struck again, his blade burning with silver fire. Together they pressed forward, refusing to give ground even as the commander's strength shook the battlefield. The fight dragged on, the valley lit with fire and shadow. Every strike rattled Elira's bones, every breath tore through her chest. Yet she did not stop. She remembered the faces of her people, the voices of those who depended on her. She thought of every life buried beneath the stars and every name she carried into battle. That memory gave her strength beyond flesh, a strength that rivaled the darkness before her. At last the commander faltered, silver fire burning deep into its armor. Elira drove her sword forward with a cry that split the night, striking through the shadow's chest. The commander roared and fell, its weapon shattering against the stone. Silence fell across the battlefield as the enemy broke, fear spreading through their ranks. Elira and Kalen stood side by side, their weapons glowing in the firelight, unbroken and unyielding. The battlefield was silent after the fall of the alien commander. Smoke rose in long trails, and the air was thick with the smell of fire and blood. Elira stood over the broken form of the enemy leader, her sword still glowing from the strike that had ended it. Her chest rose and fell as her strength began to waver. Yet her eyes never left the horizon, for she knew the war was not finished. Kalen stood beside her, his silver form flickering but still strong. His eyes glowed brighter than before, reflecting both pride and warning. "You did not fight alone," he said. "But the shadows will not stop with one defeat. They will rise again, for the hand that guides them has not yet revealed itself." His words sank into her chest, heavier than the armor she wore. The alien army had broken, scattering into the smoke. Some fled into the night while others fell. Where they stood, their courage shattered. For the first time in years, the valley was free of their endless march. Yet Elira felt no peace. A hollow silence hung in the air, as though the world itself was waiting for something more. The victory felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Elira lowered her shield, her arm aching from the strain of countless blows. She turned her gaze to Kalen, her voice soft but steady. "How long can you remain here?" she asked. His form flickered again, like a flame fighting against the wind. "As long as your will remembers me," he answered. "As long as humanity carries its dead with honor, we will not fade." His answer filled her with both comfort and sorrow. She thought of the survivors hidden deep in the earth. They would not know yet that the tide had turned. They would not see the Shadow Commander lying broken in the dirt. But when they emerged, when they looked to the sky, she wanted them to see more than ruins. She wanted them to see proof that their struggle was not hopeless. She wanted them to see that even the dead fought for them. The night grew colder as the fires began to die. Elira's sword dimmed, the last of its glow fading into the smoke. Kalen walked forward, his form steady, against the dark. "The war is not over," he said, "but the balance has shifted. You gave humanity more than survival tonight. You gave them a chance to believe again." Elira felt his words cut deeper than any wound, and she carried them like a banner in her heart. The ground shook again, not from machines but from something deeper. A tremor ran through the earth, splitting the soil at her feet. Elira's eyes widened as she steadied herself. From the cracks in the ground poured a dark mist, thick and suffocating. Kalen's eyes narrowed as he raised his blade once more. "This is no retreat," he said. "This is the true beginning." His voice was sharp as steel against stone. Elira braced herself as the mist spread across the valley, swallowing the fires and choking the air. Within the darkness, shapes began to move. They were larger, more twisted than any alien she had faced. Their forms bent unnaturally, their armor shifting like living shadows. The sight made her stomach turn, yet she lifted her sword again, refusing to bow. Kalen moved beside her, his fire burning brighter against the void. The enemy that emerged from the mist was unlike anything she had ever seen. Their voices were not screams, but whispers, cold and endless, carrying promises of death. The sound sank into her bones, but she forced it back with a roar of her own. Her shield lifted, her blade ready, her spirit burning with defiance. She knew this battle would decide everything. It was no longer about one valley or one night. It was about the survival of humanity itself. Elira turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting Kalen's silver gaze. She did not need to speak, for he already knew her thoughts. They would not stand down, they would not fall here. The true war had come, and together they would face it until the last breath of the living and the last fire of the dead burned out. The mist spread across the valley, swallowing the last fires until the world was drowned in shadow. Elira stood, with her shield lifted, her body trembling but her spirit unbroken. The whispers of the enemy pressed against her ears, cold and merciless. Yet she held her ground, her sword glowing faintly in her grasp. This was not only her battle. It was humanity's last stand. Kalen's silver light flared brighter in the suffocating dark. His blade cut through the mist, carving a path of light where none should exist. The twisted shapes closed in, their voices like knives against the mind. But he struck without hesitation. Elira followed, her shield slamming into the first of the creatures, her sword cutting through its shifting form. The thing shrieked, fading back into the void. The ground quaked as more shadows poured forth. They swarmed like a tide, their forms bending and twisting beyond nature. Elira felt the weight of 1,000 battles pressing on her shoulders. Yet, she did not falter. Every strike of her sword carried the memory of the dead. Every step forward was a refusal to bow. Kalen's presence was fire against the storm, a beacon guiding her through the endless dark. The whispers grew louder, pressing into her mind with promises of despair. They spoke of failure, of humanity's end, of the futility of her fight. Elira gritted her teeth, her voice breaking through their lies. "You cannot erase us. We are more than flesh. We are will. We are fire." Her cry burned through the mist, and Kalen's blade answered with light. Together their defiance shook the shadows. The alien horde pressed harder, forming a wall of black that seemed unbreakable. Yet Elira did not look back. She thought of the children hidden in the earth, the survivors waiting for a dawn they had never seen. She thought of every soldier who had fallen, every name carved into her memory. All of them stood with her now through Kaylin's return, through the fire in her heart. She was not a single warrior. She was the voice of her people. Kaylin's form flickered as he struck, his silver fire dimming with every blow. Elira saw it but did not speak. She knew his strength was tied to her will, and if she wavered, he would fade. She raised her shield higher, taking the brunt of the enemy's fury, giving him the chance to strike again. His eyes met hers, filled with pride and a bond that could not be broken even by death. The battle raged until the valley shook with every strike. Elira's body screamed with pain, her muscles tearing, her bones heavy as stone. Yet her spirit burned brighter than the fires that had once lit the sky. She lifted her sword for one final strike, her voice rising with Kaylin's in unison. Their cry was not of despair, but of defiance, a roar that carried beyond the stars. It was the voice of humanity refusing to be erased. Their blades struck together, silver fire and human steel cutting into the heart of the shadow horde. Light burst from the impact, tearing through the mist, breaking the whispers into silence. The creatures wailed and shattered, their twisted forms scattering like ash in the wind. The ground stilled, the darkness pulling back, leaving only firelight and silence behind. The valley was quiet once more, free of the shadow that had threatened to consume it. Elira fell to one knee, her sword buried in the dirt, her chest heaving as she fought to breathe. Kaylin stood before her, his form fading now that the battle was won. His voice was soft, yet strong. You carried them all, Elira. You gave humanity more than survival. You gave them hope. She reached for him, but her hand touched only light. His silver eyes softened, and then his form drifted into the wind. Tears burned down her face, but her lips lifted into a faint smile. The night was broken, the enemy defeated, and the dawn began to rise. The survivors would emerge and see the battlefield where humanity had stood unbroken. Elira rose, lifting her sword high into the light of morning. She was not alone, for every soul of the fallen lived within her. Humanity's story would not end in silence. It would be remembered forever.